Just so we've got a record. So this morning got Sarah Lee from BP Solicitor. So Sarah's going to do the usual kind of update on employment law. What things we should be looking out for? What kind of things are they seeing with their clients at BPE? And then we're going to hand over to Piers Norton from Coronation. So Piers is going to talk about how you can use your core benefits as part of your employee value proposition. And then very quickly at the end, and this is a conversation we'll kind of roll on. We've been talking to lots of organisations about kind of, if in terms of recruitment, and particularly with Tom and Mike, when you see this, when you try to get people to think slightly differently about where they might recruit from and how they might recruit. So Francesca works for the Early Careers company, so specialise in graduate recruitment, early years recruitment. And but also part of that, they have a social mobility audit. So trying to get organisations to really just look at, where do they actually recruit from, and are they really looking at a much wider breadth of recruitment opportunities? So that's kind of where we are today. So if that's all right, I'll come to you, Sarah.
That's fine, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great, that's great. I was having some Zoom issues before, so I just wanted to check. Perfect. Well, good morning, everyone. So Suzanne's asked me to give a quick employment law update today. Those of you who've attended the last few HR focus sessions will be aware of just how much is happening in employment law at the moment. So there's lots to talk about. I'm just going to touch on a few areas this morning, otherwise we would be here all day. I'm going to split the update into three main areas. First, some recent legislation and guidance. Second, some potential future changes to look out for, and then finally just a couple of hot topics. I'm covering quite a lot, so I'll send Suzanne a brief summary of my talk after today's session, including some links to the content I'm referring to, so she can circulate that to you all, and hopefully that will be helpful. So kicking off with some recent legislation and guidance. I'm sure you're already aware, it's quite well publicised, that from the start of April, a lot of the statutory payments and pay rates increase. So things like national living and minimum wage, maternity, paternity pay, sick pay, all those sorts of things. I'm not going to run through the rate changes now because there are hundreds of numbers and they're impossible to remember. But BP have an employment fact card with all that information in, so I'll circulate that afterwards as well, and hopefully that will be useful. Something else really useful that's just been released is some ACAS guidance on reasonable adjustments for mental health at work. It's quite short and user-friendly, and it includes some really useful information on what reasonable adjustments for mental health are. It gives some examples of those. It talks about how employees can request those reasonable adjustments and how you might respond to those requests. It gives information on managing employees with reasonable adjustments for mental health and reviewing your policies with mental health in mind. So again, I'll include a link to that new guidance in my document. Some other helpful guidance that's just been issued was on the 17th of April, the government issued guidance on ethnicity pay reporting. So you probably already know that there's a statutory requirement for employers with at least 250 employees to measure and report on gender pay, but there's no requirement to do it in relation to the pay received by different ethnic groups. But data has shown that there are perhaps unexpectedly quite wide variations in the gross earnings between ethnic groups. Some ethnic minority groups earn less per hour than white British employees on average, and others actually earn more. So analysing ethnicity pay information is one way that you can identify and investigate disparities between ethnic groups in your workforce. Now, although that ethnicity pay reporting is voluntary, as I've said, a lot of employers are starting to look at this. So this guidance from the government on how to measure, report on and address ethnicity pay differences will be really useful. So again, I'll include a link to that in my summary. And finally, in terms of guidance, there's some updated statutory guidance on gender pay gap reporting. No changes to the factual content, but the guidance that we now have is much clearer and simpler. It's just in one place on gov.uk when it was previously dotted all over the place. And it's removed quite a lot of duplication and repetition. So I'll pop a link to that in my document too. So moving on to upcoming changes, there are absolutely loads. I'll just touch on a few. Over the last few sessions, we've talked quite a lot about some of the important bills which are working their way through Parliament. And as you probably know, a bill has to progress through lots of different stages before it becomes law. In the House of Commons, it has a first and second reading, a committee and report stage, and then a third reading, and it has to jump through the same hoops in the House of Lords. Then final amendments are made and the bill becomes law. So it's a very long journey. But actually, a lot of the bills we've been talking about have now reached quite advanced stages and are really quite close to becoming law. I'll just mention a couple of the most advanced now, and I'll update on the status of the other bills in my summary. So one we've talked about quite a bit, which is really significant, is the Protection from Redundancy, Pregnancy and Family Leave Bill. And that's seeking to extend protection from redundancy during and after periods of maternity, adoption and shared parental leave, and also extend the protection at the protected period for redundancy to 6 months after the end of pregnancy. Now, this is now at the very final stage at the House of Lords, and it will then go to potentially receive royal assent. So we're looking for that to become law really quite soon. Another bill which is in an advanced stage, quite helpfully, is the Strikes Minimum Service Levels Bill, which we've talked about. And that's the bill which will allow the government to set minimum service levels during a strike in key areas such as health, transport, education and fire and rescue. That's now at the report stage in the House of Lords. So members of the Lords can have a look at it, make final amendments, and then it will go to its third and final reading before it then goes for royal assent. It's been extremely contentious, as you all know, huge outrage from opposition parties and trade unions, but it is progressing, so one to watch out for. Other potential future changes to whistleblowing law, there's nothing concrete yet, but it might be on the horizon. And the government launched a review of the current whistleblowing regime on the 27th of March. And that's looking at whether the current framework is operating effectively and actually protecting those who report wrongdoing in the workplace. The first stage of the review is going to be gathering evidence from whistleblowers, charities, employers and regulators over the next few months. And that will end in autumn 2023 with recommendations being made. So although changes to whistleblowing law, which arise from the review and its recommendations, won't be introduced until next year, probably at least, it's probably sensible to start taking stock of your internal whistleblowing policies and procedures, and just ensure that managers are trained on how to recognise and manage any whistleblowing reports that they might receive. Another area which we might see change in is protection for those with autism and other neurodiverse conditions. Now, actually, neurodiversity is a really prevalent topic still for businesses. And recent research and statistics have made clear that businesses really do need to make quite significant improvements in this area. ONS data from 2021, but quite recently released, shows that just 29% of those with autism are in employment. And a study from the University of London this year surveyed 127 employers and 990 neurodivergent employees. And the results of that were quite worrying. 65% of neurodivergent employees feared discrimination from their employer. Less than 30% had formal adjustments in place to help them at work. And actually, interestingly, 65% of managers said that they just didn't have enough knowledge to support neurodivergent workers. So it's quite timely that the government announced at the start of April the Buckland Review of Autism Employment. And that's going to be asking businesses, employment organisations, specialist support groups and autistic people to just help identify what the barriers are to securing and retaining work and progressing with their careers. Again, it's going to be kind of initial evidence gathering over the next few months, and recommendations are going to be made to the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions in September. So we'll update you again later in the year on kind of how that review goes. But again, I think it's just a really good opportunity to consider your business's approach to neurodiversity. It's an area that maybe warrants a kind of a session of its own, but think about, how you advertise and hire for neurodivergent talent, educating and training staff and managers on neurodiversity, removing stigma by making it an ongoing topic of conversation, seeking feedback like you would with other areas of work, on how you are effectively supporting neurodiverse staff. And do make sure that if you do have a neurodivergent individual, that you are offering really tailored and individual support to them, assessing what works best in terms of environment, management, communication style, ensure they have a structured role that's really tailored to meet their individual kind of gifts and abilities, give them extra time if they need it, adjust training, all those sorts of things are just worth thinking about. So I just kind of flag that up really. And finally, I'm just going to touch on a couple of hot topics that we've been seeing and there's lots of talk about at the moment within HR. So ChatGPT. Now, this is hugely topical. My colleague Steve Conley is obsessed with it. He's been obsessed with it for months, but it's quite terrifying, I think, for the less techie of us. And again, I think it might well warrant a separate session at some point because its implications for employers and employees are huge. But I just thought I would touch on some kind of interesting points today. Now, you probably understand ChatGPT much better than I do. I'm not a techie person at all, but on a basic level, it's an artificial intelligence technology that can generate very natural human-like conversations and outputs. And it has tools that can help with sales, marketing, HR, project management, all sorts of things. And actually, some businesses are using it to draft social media content, blogs, and website coding. So it's quite crazy. And I understand a lot of children are using it to do all their homework too, but that's a different issue. Now, there was a LinkedIn poll between the 10th and 17th of March, which had more than 1,000 votes. And that found that 17% of HR professionals are using it for HR tasks, and 20% are using it for something else at work. So it's just quite interesting, really. And I'd be quite interested to know afterwards if any of you use it on a professional or a personal basis. I don't yet. It terrifies me. But I think, whilst it's undoubtedly really useful, there is clearly a risk of abuse by staff who may try and use it to do all of their work, write their emails, draft documents, and just may not properly scrutinise the outcome that is produced by ChatGPT before they actually then rely on that for business purposes. There's also a real risk surrounding confidentiality and breach of confidentiality and data protection. ChatGPT have really warned against uploading any confidential information onto that service. And it's not really clear exactly what that data might then be used for and where servers are based. And of course, if people are using it to draft a letter or a document, they may well be putting that confidential information kind of into that system. So it's something I think that businesses really need to be thinking about at a high level. Have you signed up already? Are you going to sign up for it? To what extent are you happy for staff to use it? If staff are using it, what limits and framework might you need to put on it? And do you need to update your disciplinary and data protection policies in case of abuse of ChatGPT? So I'll leave that with you as something just to think about. The final thing I'm just going to very briefly touch on is long COVID. And there has been a real resurgence, I think, of COVID again recently, hasn't there? I know quite a lot of people who've got it at the moment. And I think long COVID was quite a hot topic a little while ago, and it's gone all a little bit quiet. But on the 27th of March, the TUC and Long COVID Support Employment Group issued a report on workers' experience of long COVID, and it studied more than 3,000 people with long COVID, and again revealed some really interesting and quite worrying statistics. And of course, this is from the perception of employees, so it's going to be slightly subjective, but I think it's still quite interesting. 66% of employees with long COVID said they'd been treated unfairly at work. 23% said their employer had questioned whether they actually had long COVID at all. 14% said that they'd lost their job because of reasons connected to long COVID. And as a result of the survey findings, the TUC and long COVID support are really calling for the government to introduce measures to help support those affected by long COVID. It's been talked about for a while, trying to make it a disability under the Equality Act, and recognising it as an occupational disease, introducing guidance for employers. And I think this is an area that still is very difficult for businesses because it's a new and evolving condition. It fluctuates a lot over time. And actually, a lot of people who may now be saying they have long COVID may not even have had a positive COVID test at the outset. And because, of course, tests weren't readily available at the very beginning. So you could have an issue where an employee says, I've got long COVID now, but there's no kind of real proof that they had COVID in the first place. So it's a really interesting and quite complex area. But I think unless and until the law changes on it, it's just one to keep on your radar. And just remember that long COVID can be a disability already and has been in lots of case law if it meets that test, if it has that substantial long-term adverse effect on ability to carry out day-to-day activities. So treat it like you would any other serious health condition, seek medical and OH input, have a dialogue with your employee and consider adjustments that might be reasonable, phased return to work, adjusting duties, working hours, all that sort of thing. So that's me, a bit of a whiz through a few points, but as I say, I'll share kind of a brief summary with Suzanne afterwards with lots of links to all that I've talked about. So if you want to kind of follow up anything further, you can. Thank you very much.
Oh, that's great, Sarah. That's a lot, isn't there? There's a lot of, and I do think we've had lots of conversations around sort of autism and neurodiversity. So I think definitely that is one we should pick up and maybe do something separate. We've been talking to a few people about, who work in that field, what that might look like. So I think definitely we pick up on that one. Yes, the chat GBT thing is quite interesting. I have tried it a few times. And it is clearly only as good as what is out there when it brings it back. And you do have to sanity check it. But there's some interesting comments and things running around the internet on what people have got. And I know Mel went to Emerge Digital, had an event, and they used it and showcased it. And it was writing emails backwards and forwards around pay rise increases.
Gosh.
Yeah. So, and Mel said it was, what was coming back from the employee was great. so it is being, so it is being used and out there. So anybody got any things they're dealing with or any questions for Sarah? We will share, or Glee can pick up anything else with her afterwards. But anything from anybody that they're looking at the moment? No? Any questions? Who's using Chat GBT at the moment? Anybody?
I tried it on a couple of blogs, and it gave me a good starting point, I suppose, for articles. I was just going to pick up with Sarah. I scribbled down some notes there, but my other hat is I'm chair of the governors of a school up here, and I'm certainly noticing both in primary and now secondary school a massive increase in the number of students who are diagnosed with ADHD and other autism spectrum disorders, and I guess that kind of worries me a lot, really, I suppose, as a member of modern society, about their long-term employability prospects. I guess Rachel probably sees this at the really sharp end, don't you, Rachel, at National Star College? But I just think it's a problem that's only going to get worse and worse and worse, unless employers are more open-minded to welcoming people into their organisations like that. And maybe that has to be forced by the government legislating. And two little examples of that, I shop occasionally in B&M when B&M calls me in there, and I shop occasionally in Tesco's. And both of those establishments have got staff in there that have got neurodiversity conditions and wear badges and are very treasured members of their staff. So, I guess there's a whole story to be had around that for another day, really. But I just wanted to share some of those thoughts, which, Sarah, you pricked my conscience on it, so I thought I'd mention it.
No, and I think it is a conversation we're having more and more. I mean, I think, people have traditionally managed around some of those issues. We were talking to, a couple of people, and in one organization, and they got ADHD and autism, but they, you know, they had worked their way through the coping mechanisms, and actually the employer didn't know. So I think sometimes there's that sharing of information from both parties can be is a starting point, but something we can pick up. Yeah, Jonathan. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting because there's been various conversations I know going on within my family and externally the people they're talking to. I think part of the reason there's been apparently, so somebody who's in that field was talking to my daughter. She said, well, yeah, there's been this huge increase in diagnosis of ADHD and ADD. But that's very usually down to there's a huge awareness of it now. And people are actually saying, have you thought that you might have? And then people are going off and getting checked, and they're finding that they have got a diagnosis. So I think it's, you know, it's a good thing that that's coming about, is because people are noticing trends. But the other comment this person made, which I thought was quite common, is that actually, as a race, we're not designed to be sat in a room doing one task for hours on end. So of course people don't like doing it, and their mind's going to wander, and they're going to go off and do different things. Or, you know, people want variety in their life. And I think nowadays there's this much greater choice that people sort of expect to have a variety of life. And there aren't so many people who will just go into a job and sit doing the same thing from 9 till 5. Be that because it's less, you know, manufacturing. You know, you used to have people that sat in factories and did the same thing all day, and that was the norm of life. But that's all done by machines now. And that, you know, people now are wanting more variety, and therefore, you know, can't always find it, and therefore get bored very quickly. So I think there's it was quite an interesting conversation they had in terms of there's a number of factors they feel as to why there's this huge splurge of diagnoses. But actually, it doesn't make them any less employable to a certain extent. But I mean, obviously, I know there are people who have extremes that actually it really does become a problem in the workplace. But yeah.
No, I think it is becoming more. The more open people, it's like a lot of conversations, isn't it? The more open people become about things, the more opportunities you can look at how you manage those and what we do about them. So it's good to have the conversations. Okay, so Piers, shall I hand over to you? Is that all right?
Yes, that'd be fab. Thank you, Suzanne. So I was going to talk briefly about just some of the work we've been doing with both existing and new clients around one of the risks for their business, which is around the labour market. Obviously, there's been lots of sessions through Circle Success and lots of commentary around retention, recruitment, and everything that looks like. So one of the things that we've looked at for clients is their employer value proposition. So looking at how core benefits, so things like pensions, protection, how that can be utilised as part of a wider kind of review, really, of what employees are offered. And often what that looks like is education for the employee. So companies are providing these things, but either they're not explained, or the depth in which they are kind of onboarded with this sort of thing is often training in work, and then, oh yeah, you'll get a note around pensions and that sort of thing, and there's not real much explanation. So we've been working with companies to either review their core benefits, do even the employers know what they're offering, which is always a bit of a fun conversation. Then how are they offering it to their employees? Are their employees aware and then know how it affects them? And then are certain benefits that are being provided actually being used? So we had one case with a company that had just shy of 1,000 employees, and the thing that was being used the most was the thing that they communicated the most. And I don't think that was a coincidence. Whereas other elements that were not being used, that the company was paying for, actually either weren't being utilised or had overlap, in terms of you might offer private medical insurance and life cover, but you'll get certain benefits of life cover that will cover across private medicals. So often with the review of core benefits, it doesn't mean you have to spend more. It just means that looking at what you've got and actually what's being used, pragmatism around actually what do our employees want, making sure there's benefits for benefits sake, rather than, oh, we offer this, going, well, if no one uses it and it's not real value to individuals, then kind of why are you doing it? So we've been doing a lot of that. Also looking at, there's more of a focus around well-being in general, and part of that is financial well-being. So offering either drop-in sessions for people to speak to advisors, so people like me, across all sorts of different questions, everything from what's a mortgage to I'm retiring in 2 years' time, I don't know what that looks like. But having that resource and putting that in place can make a real difference to your employees when looking at health and well-being. Financial, as boring as it is, does make up a large part of it, especially there's not so much talk about it now, but cost of living crisis. A lot of our clients, we've gone in and been in one of their meeting rooms, we put on sessions with staff that they can either book onto, or they have certain kind of rotations of people coming in and talking about different topics. And it's really important at the moment that when looking at, and I'm sure Mike and the other recruiters can give a bit of a breakdown of what the recruitment market looks like, but there's still, albeit not as mad as it was, we're still seeing clients who are going, oh, we've got people either moving or we're trying to fill gaps in our workforce, and a huge part of that is actually what is being offered, not just obviously developmental, but all the other things as well. So often looking at listening to employees, what do they actually want? Because often these things, companies start up, they think, oh, we've got to satisfy certain duties, auto enrollment, that sort of thing, put something in place and okay, that'll do. Whereas actually if companies have grown and changed, and often what was offered many years ago isn't either fit for purpose, or it's fit for purpose but isn't desired or wanted by the employees. So that's a lot of the work we've been doing on a range of different clients. As I mentioned, that one extreme before with nearly 1,000 employees, but often companies with 10 to 15 employees, often grown quite quickly. They're not quite sure what they offer, and actually a review looking at that and going, actually, we weren't aware it was either costing that, or we weren't aware that anyone actually used it, and breaking that down before actually being pragmatic around what's offered. So that's what we're seeing a lot more of. I don't know whether it's a trigger off the back of cost of living crisis and employees being offered more by their employers. I know certain employers have done cost of living kind of bonuses or lump sums for certain employees, and I don't know whether it's off the back of that, but it's far more of a conversation than I've ever seen, especially over the past 3-4 years, with having looked after business owners. It's a much bigger conversation around employees rather than just what they want to do and how they're going to grow the business. So that's a lot of the work we've been doing, and yeah, just wanted to kind of flag that, see what some of the HR people are seeing, what the recruiters are seeing as well. How big a conversation is it when discussing with clients and kind of both employer and employee, and kind of what that looks like. And also from Jonathan's perspective as an FD, what kind of depth, that obviously you've got quite a large operation up by you, but what that looks like as well.
Thanks, Piers. Any observations over the recruit? So Mike, sort of you seeing conversations around employee packages and benefits and whether or not they're utilised?
Yeah, well, all of that really, massively at the moment. I mean, there's still lots of vacancies out there. There's still a talent shortage. It might be slightly easing if you look at the stats, but there's still something like 1.1, 1.2 million vacancies out there in the marketplace. We still struggle a lot with some of our, well, a lot of our clients come to us because they struggle to fill vacancies, and many times it's because they're not even doing the basics like putting a salary on an advert. But that aside, you know, we all got to work for money. But most definitely, people's next focus is on what the overall benefit package is, particularly, you know, some substantial financial ones. But as Piers was alluding to, you know, there's a whole raft of benefits out there. And And many employers, I think, have sort of fallen into the trap of having a massive menu of benefits that are available. And as Piers was saying, people just don't know half of them are there. So I've certainly seen some of our clients doing the education piece to let people know what support's out there for their different people in the workforce who've got different needs at different stages of their lives. So most definitely, I think people are making job move choices based on the overall benefits that a company offers, and actually the culture. Culture is still a big decider in whether people move or not. And I think over the sort of COVID period and post-COVID period, a lot of organizations have shown their true colors. And now into the cost of living crisis, with people giving one-off payments, you really get under the skin of what makes senior executives and organizations tick, and whether they actually care about their people. And you can only mask that for so long. So I think all of those things are factors in the recruitment market that we see at the moment. And then to tie it back into the conversation we're having about neurodiversity is trying to encourage clients to look at people who might have had several jobs over the last 3 years because they were made redundant at the start of COVID, and have picked a couple of jobs as they go along. But we repeatedly get clients come back and went, oh, they've had 3 jobs in 4 years. What's going on? We want somebody to stay for 5 to 7 years. And all those conversations happen day in, day out in my day job, really. So it's quite a complicated arena to get it right and ultimately deliver the talent to clients that are so desperately looking for it at the moment.
But I think for employers just want to see that their employers are making the effort. You don't have to get it right all the time, and these are quite difficult, bitty conversations in certain aspects. I think that's obviously part of the culture, is if employers are trying to do things and there's that kind of consultative approach where going, either we haven't done this before, or like being more transparent, I think makes a big difference for an employee seeing that, because you don't have to get it doesn't have to be perfect, but I think whether that desire to be better in a culture from especially senior executives, it makes a big difference for the employees. And that's what we've seen a lot of, looking after just clients who then move roles. You get talking to people and they're moving for culture, or actually what they're earning is more, but to be honest, the change is for different factors. And you're seeing that a lot more from our side of things.
Yeah, the hybrid thing's a big thing as well. Obviously, most of our recruitment is office-based work, and most people, their first question, once they've sorted out the salary is right, they like the culture of the business, and the benefits are comparable to what their expectations are, want to know how many days a week have I got to travel to the office, which actually, some employers see that as a negative, but we've got some really large clients that we recruit for who expect their people to be in the office probably 2 days a week. So it's roughly a sort of 50-50 hybrid work scenario. But that means that they can attract talent from a bit further away, because you might entertain a 40 or 50 mile commute 2 days a week, whereas you wouldn't entertain that for 5 days a week. Yeah. So, there is a trade-off really that we're seeing. So, we recently placed somebody that lives in Chippenham that's going to work north side of Cheltenham. Well, if that was 5 days a week, it's not a job you'd want to do every day. I think the other thing as well is, we as a business offer an employee support package. We've got private healthcare in place, and I, about 3 weeks ago, had to remind one of my staff who was going for an eye test, they can get up to 180 quid off a pair of glasses, and a couple of quid off a routine dental treatment. So even though I think it's in our employee handbook because we've got that there, but people have just got so much going on in their heads that they need constantly reminding. So all of the above that has been mentioned, I think, is totally relevant in the current workplace today. I'll shut up now, though.
Yes, right. Has anybody else, in terms of employee packages, reviewed them recently, or constantly kind of letting people know what they're?
We actually kicked off the year with a benefits review. And it was interesting actually to I mean, we are a very small company. We've got about just over 30 employees. So and because we communicate quite a lot as well about our benefits, or I thought we did, but it was still interesting to know that actually a few of these the employees didn't actually realise that they were entitled to some of these benefits. So what I did at the beginning, once I'd had the review, well, as part of the review, was to actually set out a survey sent to all our employees on how they rate every benefit we have. And that was the bit that came back and said, oh, I didn't even know we had this one. So that was a really good thing to do at the beginning of the year, because now we have actually made some big changes in our benefits, introduced some other ones, and again, like I can't remember who was speaking, but pretty much knocked a few of them on the head, because you know they don't seem particularly relevant. So yeah, I really recommend just sending out a survey for employees to rate the benefits, because that gives you all the information you need, really.
Well, that's good. Yeah, it's a good opportunity to remind people, one, what you've got, and two, whether they're actually using them. But yes, you're right, because and it's like you've all got a lot to deal with, and sometimes you don't. And if you need something, you do it automatically. You don't necessarily go to your work handbook and go, "Can I have that from work?" So useful to remind people regularly what's available. It's a nice thing to do, isn't it? It's a caring thing in the organisation of what you provide for them.
And
But
it's
also sorry,
I was going to say, often looking at, obviously I'm going to talk about core benefits, but also part of kind of what Sarah and Steve will look at is around flexible benefits. So things like maternity, paternity, gender pay gap, lots of things that you can get in quite a lot of hot water in both legally and morally, as part of a wider. It's one of those things, if you're going to do a review, it's always one of those things that's kind of, especially things like pensions, protection, employee benefits. It's one of the things that's we'll do that in X amount of time, kick the can down the road. But I think it's a great opportunity to look at just overall what the benefits are. Are you in line with legislation? If at kind of at worst, at best, are you ahead of it? But again, listening to your employees a bit more and utilising it as an opportunity across the board, not just kind of what do we offer that's got some form of monetary value, but also how are we looking after our employees for certain things, I think is also really important.
Yes. Thank you very much. I'm conscious of time, so we can pick up on a kind of a round robin of some of the things we talked about. So I'm just going to introduce Francesca. So Francesca's from the Early Careers Company. I'm talking a lot around, you know, conversations around we've had about recruitment, and again today we've had those kind of conversations. You know, the market has eased a bit, potentially, so they say, but they're, you know, that doesn't mean that everybody who's still in the marketplace can apply for the jobs that we want them to do. So there's still that mismatch of those available against those that are potentially in the marketplace and the jobs that we want. And the Early Careers group also have a social mobility audit, which they do with companies. And some of the stats, if you hire a diverse workforce, you're 35% more likely to succeed if you don't kind of have a more diverse workforce. And potentially, I was talking to somebody at Spirax Sarco, we had an event there on Tuesday, you know, and they're saying, you know, considering where the company was, a large manufacturer, to where they are now, you know, basically recruiting in their own like is what they used to do, and now they're making some really, really big changes in terms of how they look and the workforce they're looking at. And it has made an, you know, that he was the head of, he's the head of UK HR director. So the fundamental changes they've made and the impact that he believes that's had on the business have been fundamental. So it does make a huge difference. So I'm just going to hand over to Francesca, if that's all right.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much. Also, thanks to Sarah and Pierce. It was kind of really interesting hearing about all the different things, especially chat GTP, which I do use to write my LinkedIn post, I have to say, and it has been incredibly helpful, especially that kind of starting point on what to say. And definitely talking about benefits, it's something we see a lot in the early career space and how that kind of what young people are looking for when starting a job and how that's really changed. Obviously, as Suzanne mentioned, we're going to speak a little bit more about social mobility and inclusion within the workplace, which obviously links really nicely with the conversation we were having around neurodiversity as well. So I work at the Early Careers Company. We're part of a group. So we have the Early Careers Company and the Early Careers Foundation. On the company side, we're a global DEI consulting and talent acquisition firm. So we help companies hit their diversity and inclusion targets. The foundation side is a fully registered social mobility charity that helps young people from low income backgrounds access the commercial world through a gamified learning app and mentoring. On a side note, it's also completely free for anybody to get involved, which always makes it kind of a really nice thing to talk about. But overall, as a group, we focus massively on promoting upward social mobility. What we mean by this is people having the opportunity to earn more than their parents within kind of an organization and the wider community. We help try and push this forward. There are a few reasons why we chose to focus on social mobility. And I mean, Suzanne has kind of stolen some of my stats here, but but the kind of one reason that we look at this is that it intersects so much with all the other protected characteristics out there, such as race and ethnicity. Also, the fact that other people from working class backgrounds in the UK who get a professional job are paid on average 17% less than colleagues from more affluent backgrounds. So it's showing that there's still quite a lot more to be done, especially within the UK. Also, kind of carrying on from what Sarah said around the voluntary option that companies have to talk about the ethnicity pay gap. This is something that we really think is going to start to happen for the social mobility pay gap or class, especially within the UK. And companies are going to start to be encouraged to really promote and talk about their inclusion and pay gap between class and social mobility gaps, which we think would be really interesting and something that we're kind of seeing companies start to talk about a lot more in their ESG reports or DEI reports. I mean, becoming a diverse and inclusive business has proven benefits beyond kind of the morality argument of just wanting to help people and just be a good business. I mean, as Suzanne touched on, companies are seeing kind of a financial improvement from this, with McKinsey reporting that organizations in the bottom quartile for top team diversity are 20% more likely to underperform compared to their peers who have a higher diverse staff. And also in leading law firms, employees who are educated at state schools are 75% more likely to feature in top performers decile. I mean, it's a lot to do with retention and feeling like you've earned this job instead of that you're owed a job, which is the difference that we're seeing between people from more affluent backgrounds. I mean, these are only a few of the current stats around DEI and inclusion, but really shows the importance of investing in it. I mean, the interest of social mobility has grown massively in the past couple of years. I don't know if it's kind of something that people didn't really hear about a lot anymore, and it's now really appearing in the news and conversations within both the states and legislation and here in the UK. But one way to really encourage social mobility is to start to improve that feeling of inclusion. What we mean by inclusion is kind of having the infrastructure in place that allows people, regardless of their background, race, neurodiversity, sexuality, and gender, feel welcome and have the same opportunities to progress and grow within an organization. Companies are starting to achieve this through educational workshops, creating support groups, mentoring, or being more transparent about their current diversity statistics. I mean, there are a lot of different things that companies can do, but again, knowing where you are in relation to inclusion can be really difficult. So we've been working closely with organizations through our social mobility reviews or audits, which Suzanne touched on, to help them gain an understanding of their current standing and how they can make improvements. So through reviewing all current infrastructure, procedures, policies, and running focus groups and data collection, we've gained an in-depth view on where companies and organizations stand on their inclusion and social mobility journey. Then through collaboration with our social mobility charity, we offer ratings and recommendations on areas where you can improve. So lots of different areas we help with, such as creating inclusive hiring practices. So helping companies to hire for capability and attitude instead of experience and background, or assessment processes that allow for neurodivergent candidates to have a more seamless process, or people who maybe are more scared. I mean, I studied economics at university, and I still hate doing maths tests for job interviews. And so that's someone coming from a more affluent background having that kind of feeling. So imagine somebody who has never been told how to do an assessment test having to come in and do that, and how they self-select themselves out, normally people from low income backgrounds. So helping companies to reassess how they bring in and assess young people in order to make sure that it's totally inclusive. Or, for example, building targeted internships and apprenticeships for early careers. I mean, for most organizations, it is a constant journey that we really love being a part of. And as Suzanne said in her email, if you kind of always do what you've done, then you will never change.
Thank you very much, Francesca. Thank you. Thanks. So there's a lot. I mean, those conversations we've had this morning kind of do all tie through. So this the conversations with Sarah in terms of the neurodiversity conversations we've been having, even looking at the kind of the benefits. Different benefits will be applicable to different people at different times in their life cycle, and also changing potentially the way that you look at your recruitment processes in terms of, you know, as we said, you know, if you do it the same way, you're always going to get the same results. So it's how do you break some of those processes and procedures you do to get a different result. Is there any observations, conversations that people are having in terms of, or people seeing? Oh yeah, Jonathan?
Francesca, did you say you are a recruiter as well, or just you're providing the support piece and there's other companies in your group that recruit? Or
no, so we have kind of two arms of what we do within the company. One part is the recruiting side, so helping companies to find talent. So we go out and find talent mainly through that social mobility and diversity lens. So we report on kind of our diversity statistics of talent that we're finding and really help companies to widen their pool by how we do it. And then also we help on the consulting side, so helping companies to set up infrastructure internally so they continue that inclusion and diversity even kind of after we've gone, and are able to make sure even once someone started, a lot of the time there isn't the infrastructure there to kind of support them beyond that. A lot of young people in who start graduate schemes, especially, you know, like the Big Four or big law firms, they are doing very well at hiring diversity, but a lot of people are leaving after their grad schemes because the support isn't there. So we also help companies kind of beyond that step as well to help them build that in.
Because I was going to say, from my experience with my daughters, who are, well, one of whom's currently job seeking and the other will be shortly, but is currently internship seeking, a lot of this comes down on the recruiters because they are all handled by recruiters. And certainly my elder daughter, at the end of the day, if the recruiter likes you, you know, if you pass the aptitude tests, then you're away and you've got far more chance. But vast numbers of people get filtered out at the aptitude test because it's pass or fail, and they don't even look at you, they don't even meet you or even have any conversation with you. And so I think the recruiters have an awfully big part to play in this than actually, you know, standard tests. And you alluded to that, you hate the maths test bit. But I think the other thing is, if you do have some sort of neurological diversity type thing, do you bring it up at the beginning of an interview process, or do you think you're going to be discriminated against? And I think recruiters need to be giving guidance on that, and I don't see that that's particularly forthcoming. And there's lots of recruiters on the call, and I'm sure local recruiters are going to be probably slightly better than sort of London city recruiters, but would hope so anyway. But yeah, I'd be interested in the recruiters' views on this, as to how I mean, it's a minefield, and how they're navigating it.
Yeah,
I've been more interested in the lawyer's view on it, to be honest, because you know, you're into dangerous ground there, aren't you? You start discriminating on people on the grounds of you know, pre-existing medical conditions and the likes.
But if you've got standard tests, yeah, it's more difficult.
Yeah.
Sorry, Tom.
I'm sure the other recruiters are doing exactly the same, but we obviously ask all of our candidates if they have anything that they need to declare, so that we can make reasonable adjustments either for application stages, interviews, whether that be access to documents or access to physical buildings. So we ask all these questions, but quite often candidates don't mention it because, like you said, there is this sort of perceived fear that they may then be discriminated against. Or other people, I sometimes find, bring it up. It's almost the very first conversation. I spoke to a candidate once, and literally the first thing he told me is he's only got one leg. I said, it's fine. I didn't really need to know that at this stage. But it's funny, sometimes people do just sort of open up immediately, and then others, you get a long way down the process, and they're, oh, I didn't mention this, but, and you're like, we could have done so much more to help you. So I think it's a two-way street. There is definitely a fear of asking sometimes, but then sometimes there's also a fear of telling, even if they are asked. So it can be very, very tricky to navigate. So I'd be interested to see if anybody else has had to deal with tricky situations, got any tips?
I've got a client of mine has a recruitment company, and they've started removing names and any personal details on CVs, so it removes perhaps biases that the employer may have. And that company's a B Corp, and they've done it as part of a lot of the training they've done internally, but how they can influence kind of hopefully positive change. And they've seen a lot more candidates getting further in certain processes. with especially bigger companies. So it was just an interesting insight for someone who's not in that world, seeing that what is perhaps a small change or something you wouldn't necessarily think of can actually make a big difference.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, when we used to recruit, we used before we gave anybody, when we were at Business West, we would always remove anything. All they would get was the information. We wouldn't put school, education, anything. So before they made the decision, otherwise you just try to look for people that you feel more comfortable with talking to. So,
yeah, definitely. It's kind of touching on like unconscious biases and Johnson, you mentioned like with your daughters, how they need the recruiters to like them. And that's like just such a huge thing of people. There's a lot of companies don't have any standardized interview questions or kind of any process on what they report back on people. So they're kind of saying, oh, I like this person because we happened to grow up in the same area is actually why they like them, not because they're good for the role. So kind of looking at inputting kind of these assessment processes that allow you to make sure that you're actually assessing for the right things and that everybody is. I mean, there's loads of stats showing that even just talking about unconscious biases to employees increases it massively. Decreases it. So people are so much more aware of how they're hiring just from having one conversation about it. And kind of linking to that, I actually had someone I used to work with who we were talking and we were writing some email, and I mentioned something about dyslexia, because he said he has dyslexia, and he was like, oh, well, I was told to never tell anybody that I have it because it would go against me getting hired or I might get fired. And I was like, no, like that is not the case, because now I'm going to be less harsh on whether your spelling and grammar, because I know there's a different understanding, or we pay for you to have Grammarly or something, it was just so interesting that at the age of, would have been 20, had told that he shouldn't tell anybody in his workplace that he has dyslexia and he should just like kind of struggle through it. So I think there's definitely an education piece on both sides, with employers being more open to having those conversations and kind of encouraging their employees or their prospective candidates to come forward with it, because they know it isn't something they're going to be discriminated against.
And we talked a lot about, I mean, particularly with Rachel, on unconscious bias, and you're right. If once you start to make it conscious and try to talk about it, you actually start to look at your own ways of behaviour and the language that you use. So the more it's one of those conversations, the more you talk about it, the more opportunities. This slight aside, I was at a book launch, and it was a book had been written by on autism by an autistic person who already, and also worked with the illustrator who had ADHD and was autistic, and they had an interviewer. So I was they're part of the C2S group. So I went along and got the book for Milestone School, because I thought it'd be really, really, really a lovely book for Milestone. But there was, I don't know what you call them, there was a lot of people in the room clicking and flicking with things on their arms and manipulating bits of equipment that they were looking, and the noise was quite alarming. So it was quite interesting from my perspective, actually, in a room full of people who weren't really hugely comfortable, but were there, and how they were making themselves more comfortable in that environment. So it was, for me, it was a really good learning opportunity to be in that environment. I'm conscious of the time, and I have one plea for this morning as well. Is we're coming to we've got our business awards, so it's coming to the end of the opportunity to apply. We've had loads of them in, so we really, really want, and particularly for coming along to HR. So we've got Talent Training and Development Award, we've got Employee Engagement, so read for that, Best Place to Work. We've got Culture and Diversity, so based on some of the conversations we've been having today, if anybody, yourselves, organizations that you work with, please let us know if you want a little bit of an extension. The closing date is Monday, but there really is, quite a few awards available around that sort of the people part of the organization. So I'll send the link around again, and I'll keep sending the link around again and again. But if there is anybody that can apply for the awards, please do. It's not, we had, based on actually conversation around neurodiversity, and I think it was talking to Tom with Hooray, talking to Prudence, form filling is not everybody's cup of tea. Presenting, and again, I was at Prima Dental, one of the girls there, she's dyslexic, she finds form filling really difficult. So we have made the form really simple. It's 3 questions. You know, maybe we might have to adapt it later on, but at the moment it's really easy to get the information on a sheet of paper. So please do have a look. I'll send them around. So thank you very much, everybody. Sarah will send me the information she was talking about. I'll share that round. I'll share the details of peers if you want to have a look at what you're doing with your benefits. So a great idea from Amanda in terms of a survey to see actually what people think that you've got in the organisation, what you do, and I'll send the details around if you want to know a little bit more about social mobility audits as well from Francesca. And I'll send the dates around for the next events. So thank you very much, everybody, and we'll see you soon. Thank you very much. Thank you. Rachel, you're staying on.
Thank you.
Really interesting. Thanks a lot. My
Thank you
second
very
time
much. Nice to see you. Yeah, cheers. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye. Bye.
Thanks, Amanda. Thank you. Thanks. Oh, and it's gone.
Hello.
Oh, hello. Let me stop the